But let's welcome all of our listeners by internet and television, radio, Roku. Thank you for listening in. We're glad you're here today. We hope the broadcast will be a great blessing to you. I'm in the book of Genesis, chapter number 32. Because this is the second message of a series, I just wanted to pick out the verse that I used dealing with Jacob wrestling with the Lord all night long. And the Bible said in verse number 31, after he wrestled, and you remember this from last week, he said in verse 31, and as he passed over Penuel, and that means to see God face to face, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. And I started last week on preaching on the subject, the sun will rise and shine again in your life. Now, I don't want to take all of my allotted time to revamp part number one. If you were not here, you could go on Facebook and other places and find out how we saw that God blessed Jacob financially when he was down to nothing. And the sun can come up on you financially. It doesn't matter what the government says. Doesn't matter whether you get a stimulus check or not. God is able to take care of his children. And if you will honor God with your substance, God will honor you with a promise. And the promise is he will give it back to you, shake down, pressed together, running over, shall men give unto your bosom. That's a direct promise from the Word of God. So hang on. Maybe you are going through some financial adjustments, as I'm sure all of us are at this time, having to cut back on things. Maybe give up some luxuries that maybe you were comfortable with. But if you'll just walk through this and honor God and be faithful to God, the sun will shine again in your finances. So I want to pick up with part number 2. The sun can shine again in your life and in mine in spite of our failures. What I love about the Bible is it tells you the good, the bad, and the ugly about everybody. The Bible is not partial. And in the pages of the Bible, you find all the failures of Jacob. And by the way, they were a lot of them. When anyone heard the name Jacob in Canaan land, people would look away and shake their heads and look at the ground. That name, Jacob, nobody liked him. They knew how big of a crook and a sinner he was. He was that conveying outlaw, that conning outlaw, that conveying outlaw that was either we're going to wind up in prison or get killed. He was the type guy that when they sat down at the Spit and Whittle Club, they would all say, I wonder if he'll go to prison or get killed first. His deception and wickedness was known throughout all the land of Canaan. Everybody despised Jacob. You know, Jacob was that dirty sinner that everybody shunned and detested to be around, even when he came in public places. If you go through the book of Genesis and find the long list of Jacob's mistakes and compare them with all his shortcomings and all the weaknesses, you'll find out that they far outweigh what tiny mention of kindness is ever illustrated to his name. Jacob's life was an illustration where you remember when you were little, your parents would set you down and say, now, if you don't listen to me, you're going to turn out like so-and-so. Do you remember them days? And it was usually a cousin, a neighbor, or a brother, or a sibling, and they say, now, if you don't straighten your life up, and you don't quit rebelling, and if you don't start listening to me, you're going to wind up like so-and-so. All of us had that done to us when we were kids, and little did we know our parents were prophets at that time. I did not turn out like those that they accused me of. I turned out worse. But if you went to Canaan, it was Jacob that was always brought up at the family table that if you don't listen to me, you're going to turn out like Jacob. And if you would ever say there was going to be coming a day when Jacob was going to turn around and his life was be different, the people at Canaan would laugh at you. They would say, he's never going to be different. Jacob's always going to be Jacob. He's going to die a trickster, a supplanter, a liar, a crook. He's a conniver, and he's always going to be that way. But they left out one element, that when your family gives up on you, and when society gives up on you, and when judges give up on you, and when psychologists give up on you, and when the law gives up on you, there's a Peniel in your life where you can meet God face to face, and God intervene in your life unexpectedly, and without even asking you about it, God can show up, wrestle with you, save you, forgive you, and turn your life around, and make you come from a Jacob and be turned into an Israel. And did you know what's amazing? Is that when God saved Jacob, knowing all of his faults and failures, God never was ashamed to be identified with Jacob. Think about this. All through the Bible, when people refer back to the genealogy of Israel, here's what they will say to you. I am the God. Remember, the Lord spoke to Israel and said this. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But now wait a minute. In Genesis chapter 32, Jacob's name was changed by God himself and said, you're no longer Jacob. Your name is Israel, which means a prince with God, which means a new beginning, which means you're going to be successful, which means you're going to be a leader, which means you're going to be a bright light. But God said, I want the world to know something. When I saved Jacob, I know how messed up he was. I know the addictions he had. I know the failures he had done. I know the lies he had told. And I want the world to know he is my child. In spite of the fact that he was a Jacob, in spite of the fact that he's not everything he ought to be, I'm glad there's a God that'll love us in spite of our failures. You say, I'm messed up. You say, I'm messed up, Brother Kid. As a Christian, I'm messed up. My life is dark. I've walked away from God. My life's in shambles. My marriage is on the rocks. I've lost my job. I'm going back to the things God saved me out of. But the sun can rise again. All you have to do is turn your face toward God, and there's a second chance God that will abundantly pardon you and welcome you back and put you... I'll tell you something. Jacob's hip was out of joint. And according to Hebrews 11, it never did go back into joint. He limped the rest of his life. What he suffered from his past life never got away from him. But he didn't let it stop him from walking toward the sun. He got him a staff, and when the sun come up, here's what he said. Yeah, I got an addiction. I got a weakness. I got a failure, and I could use it as an excuse to quit. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm coming your way with my failure, with my addiction, and with all my shortcomings. You ought to quit using your failures for an excuse and get back up again and tell the devil to go to hell and walk with God even in your failures. Even in your failures. Because you see, when everybody gives up, that gives God a perfect opportunity to move in. I remember preaching for an elderly man years ago. He's in heaven now. And I told him years ago, I said, even if you don't book me for revival, I'm coming every year because I just want to hear your testimony. He's dead now with the Lord, and I sure do miss him. His daddy was a bootlegger down in South Mississippi. And when he was a young man, his daddy got killed in gunfire over liquor. And the only thing his drunk daddy left him was a pistol. And following the footsteps of his daddy, this young man began to sell and deal liquor. He's down in Mississippi. It's against the law. The feds are everywhere. But his mama was an old-time Christian. I'm talking about the old grannies that we used to remember. You remember the old grannies in the cotton skirts and the aprons across their dress? I remember them days. Had their hair up in a bun, didn't wear any makeup, didn't know what a high heel shoe was. Is all they could do to have shoes, period. They never got their fingernails done because they knew it would have come right off again using that scrub board out on the back porch. They churned their butter. They made their milk. And they lived off the land. That's how our country used to be. And he had a godly old mother that loved him. And they were having a tent meeting down in South Mississippi one summer, and it went on for 2 weeks. And he said, I don't know how, but one night at the supper table, my mother tricked me into promising her I'd go to that tent meeting one night. He said, look back on it now, I don't even know why I said that. I knew I wasn't going to go to that tent meeting, and I didn't lie to my mama. And he said, so the tent meeting went on for 2 weeks. I'm bootlegging liquor all through those southern counties every night of the week. Had a little old tore-up Ford car, and he said I'd had the whole floorboard in the back of it full of liquor with cardboard in between the quart jars where they wouldn't cling together and break going down the rock roads. He said it was the last day of the revival. We were sitting at supper, and Mama looked at me and said, son, you promised me you'd go to the tent meeting, and tonight's the last week. He said, my car was full of homebrew. He said, I had deliveries to make all night long. He said, I mean, my car was loaded down. I even had it in the floorboard of the front of the car. And he said, Mama, I'm tied up. I'm sorry, I forgot about it. She said, son, you promised me you'd go to this meeting one night, and this is the last night. He said, I know, Mama, and I don't want to argue with you, but I've got to go. And he said, my mama's chin began to quiver. And I said, now, Mama, don't cry. She said, son, I've been praying that God would save you. Please don't go out on the street tonight. He said, I jumped up. I couldn't take Mama crying. I got in the car and I started down the road and remembered I forgot the only thing my daddy had ever gave me, a gun. So he said, I flopped that old Ford around on that rock road and I went back to the house, and he said, I got up on the front porch and I went to grab the screen door and I looked, and there laid my silver-haired mama in the floor. She's laying on her belly. And I just looked inside the screen door, and this is what she said, Lord, I don't know where my boy's going tonight, but it ain't good. And I've prayed and begged you to save my boy. And I know his life is messed up. He's not turned out the way you or I, either one, would want him to turn out. But Lord, you're God enough, you could turn that car around and bring my boy back to this house and make him go to revival with me. He said, I couldn't take it. Said, I jerked that door open, tears filled my eyes. I said, Mama, if you'll shut up, I'll go to that tent meeting with you. He said, I forgot my car was full of liquor. He said, my mama got in the front seat of that car with the biggest Bible you'd ever seen in your life. Got in there with that cotton dress and her hair up in a bun and put both her feet on quarts of moonshine. Said, we were going down the road. Mama didn't even know what it was. And said, I was picking up a boy to help me deliver it. He had his thumb out. He said, I pulled over and he opened the door to get in, and there sat my mama with a Bible. And he said, get in. He said, I don't think so. I got something else I got to do tonight. I was just letting you know. He said, shut up. If I'm going to meeting, you're going to meeting with me. Get in the back. He said, I threw my buddy in the back of the car. Both his feet are on quarts of moonshine. And we go to a tent meeting with a car packed full of moonshine. He said, I sat in the back where all the moonshiners sat. And said, my mama went down to the front row. Said, them old people got them mandolins and guitars out and got to singing. Said, my mama got to shouting and a sweating and a slinging sweat. Said, directly the hairpins come out of her hair. And I remember these days. Oh, Miss Blagg shouted when I got saved. She's 78 years old. She shouted an hour and a half. We had to tote her out to the car like a drunk woman. She had shouted. We had to fan her. I'm telling you, them old timers knew what it was to get in the glory. And said, my mama shouted till the hairpins started to fall out of her hair. And that man got up and preached on hell. He said, I believe that corn liquor going through these streets, he said, I believe they'll fuel the pits of hell. Liquor is what keeps hell afire. And he said, I knew my whole car was full of it back there. And he said, before I knew it, he said, I jumped up while he was preaching, and I looked, and he said, I saw my mama shouting, and I saw that Bible in her lap, and that liquor, and I thought about my daddy dying with this liquor, and that pistol that he left me. That's all my daddy left me. And he said, I jumped up and started to run to the front. Somebody grabbed my coat. He said, I thought they were pulling me back in. He said, I turned around and it was my friend. And he said, if you're getting saved, I'm getting saved too. He said, I ain't going to hell for you or nobody else. Are you listening? I'm talking about two men that the community had given up on. I'm talking about two men that had been in jail, within 100-mile radius of that little town. Everybody knew how wicked and vile they were. He said, preacher, when we got saved, he said, Mama and some of the deacons come out, and we poured that liquor down the side of the hill and sung Amazing Grace, and said they shouted all over out in the fields that night pouring that liquor out. He said, I got in my car with my mama and my friend. And he said, I drove down to the middle of the town. We didn't have a street light. It was a four-way stop. He said, I stopped my car on a Friday night in the middle of that intersection. He said, I got out of that car and got up on the top of my car and started telling that town that God had just saved me in a tent revival. He said, I wasn't. Woo! He said, I wasn't yelling 5 minutes and I just got saved. Here come the sheriff's car. He said they had the big cherries on it. You remember back then. and said he pulled up with a cherry on. Said he got out and stood beside my car and said, "What are you doing up here, boy?" He knew he arrested him many a times. He said, "Sheriff, I'm not up here because I'm selling liquor. I'm not up here because I'm drunk. I got saved tonight in a tent meeting, and I want this town to know that I'll never be the same." He said, "Son, get off of your car right now and get on top of mine. I'm going to drive you through town, because if God can save you, God can save anybody. Aren't you glad that when everybody else has given up, there's a great God in heaven that can intervene in your life and make you, woo! God can turn you around. In spite of your failures, the sun will shine again. Number 3, may I hurry and say, in spite of your family situation, the sun will shine again. You must understand, because of Jacob's rebellion and lifestyle, for 40 years the family had been split, splintered, and torn apart. Everywhere I go in revival meetings, and I'll be in 2 this month, I cannot tell you the last revival I've preached where some family did not come up to me during that revival and say, "Pray for me. Our family is torn apart." I'm talking daughter-in-laws, son-in-laws, children, grandchildren, parents, husbands and wives. Constantly pray. My family is in shambles. We're living in such sad, wicked days that the children we've raised now turn around and use our own grandkids to punish and control the grandparents. And if you don't bow to their every command and their every demand, they punish grandparents by not allowing their children to have a relationship with them. And without going into detail and calling names or getting any specifics, I just want to say this. Any child that allowed your mama to wipe your rear and teach you how to walk and feed you in the middle of the night and done without a lot of things so you could have what you had growing up, and made sure you had a roof over your head, and your daddy made sure there was food on the table and shoes on your feet, and now you're so vile and wicked that you would keep your grandkids from the very person that raised you and gave you your life, you're wicked as hell! And you tell your kids, "I said so." Any child that would deprave their grandparent from seeing their grandkids when there's nothing involved that's ungodly or wicked, you are wicked. And any of you panty-laced men that let your lizard-tongued wife tell you when you can see your parents, you're dumber than a box of rocks. There ain't no woman gonna tell me when I can talk to my mom and... So I'm just going to clear house while I'm here, because I know some of you don't like this. And this is why I tell you, if you're a strong, lizard-tongued, domineering woman, don't bother joining this church, because you're not going to make it here. You may run your husband, you may run your family, you may run your job, you may run your computer, but hell will freeze over, baby, before you run this church. God did not send me here to run the church. God sent me here to keep you from running the church. So, you get these lizard-tongued Jezebels mad. They leave and say, "Oh, that church is a cult. Oh, that church is a cult." Sure, we're a cult to you because we won't let you control us. And I want to say it again. You wimpy, lacy pants men that'll let your wife tell you where you can go and who you can go and when you can go, you're out of your ever-loving mind. You ought to sue your brain for non-support. Drama, division, bitterness, jealousy, hatred, and unforgiveness floods the average family in America. You can't have a family reunion anymore. You can't get together on holidays. I promise you, somebody's going to say something stupid. And 90% of the time, it'll be a woman. And it'll be something that happened 47 years ago that nobody even knows what in the same hell they're talking about, but they got to bring it up, and everybody starts taking sides, and the family agrees, and this side don't agree, and nobody can eat, and everybody's upset, and nobody talks again because of something stupid. You might as well say amen, because I'm going to preach it anyhow. And the only reason why you women are not clapping, you're guilty. Other than that, you know I'm telling the truth. Families are not families anymore. We tolerate each other. We hang on by a thread. We can't wait to get away from each other. For 40 years, 40 long years, Jacob never got to a family birthday, a Thanksgiving dinner. And every 40 years, they'd get together to reunions and say, where's Jacob? And they say, I don't know, he's gone. No doubt they would whisper into their other loved ones, he'll never be back. He's too far gone. Things will never be the same. If he is alive, why, 40 years is a whole generation that doesn't even know him. He'll never come back home. His life is what it is, and he's gone. But when your family is screwed up, and your marriage is falling apart, and your kids can't get together without a fight, and your grandkids are being held from you, and sometimes you feel like you're losing your mind. But you grandparents, remember this. You're not the loser, they are. They're the ones that are losing out. Because nobody will love their kids like a grandparent does their grandkids. That's exactly right. Let me tell you what grandkids are. That's God's reward to us for not killing you when we were raising you. So God gives us something called grandchildren. We should have had them first and bypassed children altogether. I paddled my children. I paddle my grandchildren. It's a stick with a pillow on the end that says, I love you. You get soft in your older years. When you're young, you beat your kids just in self-defense. They're crawling all over you, hanging all over you. Sure, you beat on them, just trying to get a moment's peace. But those grandkids are different. You look at it different. And even when you see your kids scold them or get on them or say, you're going to get a spanking when you get home, your heart melts. Now, when it was your kids, you couldn't wait to get them home. But them grandkids, you pray for them. And when you put them in the car, you tell them, act like you're asleep. So when you get home, you don't get a whipping. Something changes about those grandchildren. And if you don't let those grandparents love and be part of their lives, it's a proven fact, those grandchildren are psychologically affected. You say, but it's just so far gone, I don't know if it could ever come back again. Really? Jacob was gone for 40 years without any family at all. The two wives he married were sisters from in the pagan land where he was with Laban, over in the land of Haran. But when Jacob come back and he got right with God in a family situation that seemed impossible, did you know God gave Jacob 12 sons? And by the way, in case you don't know it, they're the 12 sons of Israel. They're the 12 tribes of Israel. You know what God is saying? You may have come from a messed up home. You may have come from a messed up background. You may have come from a divorced home. You may have come when your daddy left you. You may have been adopted. Your mama may have walked out on you. But I'm telling you, I'm God enough that the sun can shine again and I can give you the family you never had. The sun can shine again in your family. I remember years ago, I was preaching a tent meeting. And we stood for invitation, and a guy come flying down the aisle so fast that the shavings that we had on the ground was just like a little tornado behind him. He was flying down the aisle. I said, now, Lord, he's either coming to get saved or I'm going to have to hit him with a folding chair because this dude, you don't move that fast unless something heavy is on your mind. And he got to the front of the tent, and he fell on his knees and began to scream out to God for mercy and forgiveness. When he got done praying, I was talking to some people after service. He was sitting on the altar there waiting on me. I sat down beside him and he looked at me and he said, sir, God just saved one of the wickedest men in this town tonight by saving me. I said, is that right? He said, I'm vile. He said, I just got out of prison. He said, 26 years ago, I came home drunk and the woman I was living with was sitting on the front porch in a chair. He said, I was shot drunk, and I come up on the porch, and she looked at me and said, I'm pregnant. He said, I remember picking her and the chair up and throwing it out in the yard. I went in that little shack we were living in, and I took all of her belongings and threw them out in the grass. And I said, I hate you. You're nothing but a whore. Get away from me. She picked up the clothing that I'd thrown out in the yard, and 26 years ago, preacher, I watched her hitchhike down the road, and I've never seen her again. He said, I don't know if our child is a boy or a girl. I've been a drunk. I've been to prison since then. He said, if I were to see my child, I wouldn't even know it. I've never had contact with her. I don't even know where she's at. I found out later it was an alias name that I was living with her. I don't even know her real name. He said, preacher, I've never had a family. I'm a screwed up dude. I've never had a wife. I've never had a kid. But somewhere in this world, there's a 26-year-old boy or girl that's mine. And I know there's 7 billion people in the world today. Could God find my child and somehow let me meet my child? I'm a Jacob. I have no family. It's splintered and separated. But could God find my baby for me? When he said that, Brother Greg, over on the right side was a little silver-haired woman from Lenore. He did not know it, and neither did I. But she took that woman in when she was expecting his son. After service, she came to me and said, sir, could I speak to you about that gentleman? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, you're not going to believe this. I raised his boy. She said, he's 26 years old now. She said, he got saved when he was 13. And she said, every Wednesday night at prayer meeting since he was 13 years old, Johnny stands up and says, preacher, somewhere out there yonder in that big old world, I got a drunk daddy. And I know there's 7 billion people in this whole world. But could God put me back with my daddy? She said, for 13 years, Johnny's been praying every Wednesday night that God would help him find his daddy. So the next night, they didn't know what was going on. They came back to the meeting, and I called the daddy up to the platform. And I said, I heard you have a child, 26 years old, that you've never met. And he said, that's true. And I don't even know where to start. I don't have a name. I don't even know if it's a boy or a girl. So I brought Johnny out, and I said, I want you to meet Johnny. Johnny's visiting with us tonight. I said, you know Johnny? He said, no. I said, Johnny, do you know him? He said, no. I said, I just want you to know that's your son. And in front of 800 people, I watched God take a Jacob from a busted home. And I watched him take a little boy that all he longed for was his daddy. And he told me, he said, all my mama told me was my daddy was short and stout and black-haired. And he said, all my life, preacher, every time I went somewhere and I saw a short, stocky man with dark hair, I would say, I wonder if that's my daddy. And he said, now God has taken 2 broken homes that have been splintered, that had never even met for 26 years, and brought us together under a little gospel tent and saved us by the grace of God. I'm telling you, the sun's coming up on your family. God is big enough to put your family back together again. Then God is big enough on that final day when we say goodbye to this world and we have to meet God. In Hebrews 11, when Jacob died, the Bible said he died leaning on his staff. And here's what the Bible said. He left here worshiping God. Let me tell you something about Jacob's death, and there's much more I could say, but I got to close. From the time Jacob got right with God and the time Jacob died was 50 years. Isn't it amazing that God, he was in the wilderness 40 years, he gets right with God, he comes back home, and now he lives 50 more years. He died at the age of 149. So 50 years he lived after he met God. Do you know what 50 is in the Bible? It's the year of Jubilee. If you will go back in the Old Testament, every 50 years in the land of Israel, the 50th year was called the land of Jubilee, the year of Jubilee. On that year, all people that were enslaved, all people that were sold in bondage were set free. Land that had been lost was given back again. It was a year of rest. Nobody worked. Everybody took the year off. Yeah, we had Democrats back then. Everybody took a year off. Everybody got a check and just stayed at home. But on the 50th year, it was called the day of rest, and it was a refreshing time for them to get in the presence of God so that they could see him afresh and anew, face to face. Jacob is saying, look, when I got born again, it was the greatest day of my life. God turned me around, blessed me financially, put my family back together, forgave me of all of my sin. But the greatest day of my Christian life is the day that I get to see him. 50 years later is the year of Jubilee. I'm going to my home where I can rest. All my labors are over. There'll be no more suffering and pain pain and disagreements and misunderstandings, and nobody will have diabetes or heart attacks or cancer, and nobody will be sick or on oxygen, and there'll be no hospitals and urgent cares. There'll be no policemen over there, no security cars. Nobody will be sick over there. You'll never hear a siren. The sun will never go down. You'll never lock your door. The Lamb is the light of the city, and the gates are made out of solid pearl, and the walls are made of jasper, and the roses never fade, and Jesus is on his throne, and we're in a glorified body, and we'll all... Woo! I say the sun's coming up in our final day. Let's give the Lord a hand in the house of God today. God bless you.
These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant